The last American troops cleared out of Bagram Air Base without celebrations or fanfare. The U.S. military, citing security concerns, is not saying when or how U.S. troops are leaving. Bases are shutting down without hardly a peep. At the White House, President Biden also did not want to draw attention to Afghanistan, bristling when reporters pressed him today about the impact of the withdrawal.
Are you worried that the Afghan government might fall?
I think they have the capacity to be able to sustain the government.
I thought on Afghanistan.
I want to talk about happy things, man.
Afghanistan.
I'm not going to answer any more questions on Afghanistan. Look, it's 4th of July.
But not talking about it won't stop this. As U.S. troops leave, some Afghan security units are collapsing. The Taliban's propaganda channels, in confirmed events, show Afghan police and soldiers giving up their bases and their weapons. The Taliban have even been handing out pocket money to pay for their transport home. Humiliation. Most Afghans do not want the Taliban to return. Zaman Ahmadi is studying to be a computer engineer. He taught himself English, listening to Voice of America radio.
All Afghanistan going to be the same as before. No education, no freedom, there's no TV, there's no any broadcast, anything.
2,442 Americans died in this war. But for years, it's mainly been a training mission to prop up the Afghan security services. By September, nearly all U.S. troops will be gone. And it's the Taliban who are now celebrating as Americans leave in silence. Thousands of Afghan translators who fought alongside U.S. troops also fear what may be coming. The Biden administration has promised to resettle many of them in the United States. But the details are still unclear, and the translators are still here and afraid. Lester?
Richard Engel in Kabul tonight. Thanks. And the rise of the Taliban once again in Afghanistan poses a significant danger to the country's women and girls. Andrea Mitchell joins us now to talk about that. What's the biggest danger here, Andrea?
Lester, women and girls have been able to go to school, hold jobs, and take positions in government since the Americans came. But all that was banned under Taliban rule, with violators subjected to beatings or worse. Young women have never known anything but the freedoms they've won over the last decades. Leading Democratic senators say the administration is not doing enough to protect their rights. And even if the Taliban don't take over, the most recent UN study found 2/3 of all Afghan men said women have too many rights.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.